Hello and welcome. You're watching Gravitas with me, Molly Gambhir. Here's a look at what's lined up for you on the show tonight. Our cover story tonight is about the British monarchy. You see, the countdown has started for King Charles III's coronation. And before that big day, Charles wants to dig deep into history. In fact, he has ordered a probe into the monarchy's link to slavery. I know what you must be thinking. What is even the point of this probe? What does the king really hope to achieve? What triggered the move and why now? This and more coming up over the next few minutes as a part of our cover story. Also on the show for you tonight, another Hindu temple has been vandalized in Canada, adding to a growing list of anti-India acts of vandalism in the country. We get you a detailed special report. Are Chinese banks the most corrupt? Why is Xi Jinping waging a war against the country's financial industry? We discuss. Israel-Palestine tensions continue to rise, leaving the region once again on the brink of war. We get you the latest. Japan has declared a war on Poland as it tackles the hay fever menace. It is a double whammy as the country also deals with the worst bird flu outbreak and runs out of land to bury chickens. We get you the complete story. On the 6th of May, King Charles will officially ascend to the British throne with a formal coronation. But he has already taken a decision that could become the hallmark of his reign. He has ordered a probe into the links that British royalty has had with the slave trade. You heard that right. Into whether British kings and queens profited from the slave trade. We can give you some idea about how the British kings and queens made money out of slavery in one way or another by looking at some facts. Now, this is just a glimpse, but enough to reveal what the establishment has kept well hidden. Have you heard of the South Sea Bubble? Well, these are the details. The South Sea Company was formed in 1711. What was its purpose? It aimed to consolidate the British government's debt. You see, back then, Britain was engaged in expensive wars. And the government debt was at over $11 million. So the country needed money, funds. The Bank of England was the sole lender to the government. The South Sea Company took on and paid off the debt. In return, it was granted a monopoly on trade between Britain and Spain in the South Seas, particularly on the sale of slaves. But this idea had a major problem. Britain was at war with Spain. It was in no position to dictate the trade there. Unless favorable terms were reached in peace talks, which is exactly what happened. A series of treaties were signed between 1713 and 1715. They were called the Peace of Utrecht. And as a result, the South Sea Company scored a monopoly in slave trade. 4,800 slaves were transported to Latin America annually. By 1718, politicians, celebrities, nobles, including author Jonathan Swift and scientist Isaac Newton, had invested in the company. King George I, in fact, became the company's governor. He held a substantial shareholding. The company's share prices kept going up. But it did not last long and the market collapsed. The company's shares plummeted to $154 by the end of the year. The South Sea bubble had burst. Despite the collapse, there was a clear winner. It was the royal family. King George I and II made huge profits from investments in the company between 1714 and 1740. The South Sea Company took nearly 42,000 African captives on its ships. More than 7,000 people died on the voyages. Let's just look at a little more history here. You see, Britain was built on the backs and souls of slaves. The royal family reaped much of its wealth to investments in African slavery for over 270 years. 12 British monarchs sponsored, supported, and profited from slavery. It all began with Queen Elizabeth I. In 1564, she gave a large royal ship to a slave trader. In return, she demanded a share in the profits of the voyage. On that particular trip, several Africans were captured and at least 600 of them were seized from Portuguese ships. After Elizabeth I, King James I carried forward the dark legacy. In fact, he granted royal connected merchants a monopoly on trade with Africa. In 1618, the Guinea Company was formed. It captured slaves for English-owned tobacco plantations in Virginia. And the company continued to enjoy its monopoly under King Charles I's reign. So, you see, while the English colonized the world, one country at a time, it was the slaves who helped drive these economies. In 1702, Queen Anne came to power, and under her rule, the South Sea Company was formed. Slave trading expanded dramatically, and we have already told you the details. Between 1640 and 1807, around 3.1 million enslaved people were transported from Africa. According to official figures, some 2.7 million arrived. The rest died en route. Such were the atrocities of the royals. In 1833, 800,000 were working as slaves in Britain. Even after their liberation, they were forced to work 45 hours a week for their former masters. And of course, without any compensation. Now King Charles says he supports a probe into the royal family's troubling history. But we ask, what is even the point of this? Why is he offering research when he should be offering apologies? When he should be acknowledging the horrors inflicted by his predecessors, the cruelty, the manslaughter. Millions suffered as a result of the whims of British monarchs. Are British royals finally going to accept responsibility? And if they do, will they give reparations out of their massive private wealth? Has King Charles, in his desire to match the spirit of liberalism, put his fist in a hornet's nest and released angry toxic bees, which will sting not just him, but his family and the lineage which has made him monarch? Will this contribute to the departure of countries like Australia from the Crown's embrace? We don't know, but what we do know is that King Charles does not also fully know the size of the conflagration that will follow now that he has lit the fuse of an explosive powder keg. And moving on to our other top focus. Yet another Hindu temple has been desecrated in Canada. And this time, the target was a temple in the town of Windsor in Ontario. Anti-India graffiti was spray painted on the walls. India has condemned the act of vandalization. Our next report getting you the complete story.
Shortly after midnight on Tuesday, two people vandalized a Hindu temple in Canada's Windsor. Anti-India graffiti was painted on the exterior walls. The incident was caught on camera. One person is seen drawing on the walls, while the other keeps a watch. The vandals painted anti-India slogans on the walls. Slogans against Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi were also painted. Windsor police have launched a probe into the incident. A hunt is on for the two suspects. India has condemned the incident. New Delhi is also taking up the matter with the Canadian authorities.
This is a very unfortunate incident, and we condemn it. This issue has been taken up with the Canadian authorities, and with the same request that we made on earlier occasions. Please catch the perpetrators. Please try to ensure that this does not happen again. And I hope that Canadian authorities are able to take action on those lines.
But this is not a one-off incident. On February 14th, the target was the Sri Ram temple in the town of Mississauga. The slogans spray-painted included those attacking India and Prime Minister Narendra Modi. One of the slogans even described the founder of the separatist Khalistan movement, Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale, as a martyr. Earlier on January 30th, the Gauri Shankar temple in Brampton was similarly desecrated. In September last year, an episode of such vandalization occurred at the front entrance to the Swaminarayan temple in Toronto. None of these incidents have so far resulted in any arrests. But it's not just temples that are being targeted. The incident on March 27th involved the decapitation of a Mahatma Gandhi sculpture located on the campus of the Simon Fraser University in British Columbia's Burnaby. Just 4 days before that, a statue of Mahatma Gandhi located at the City Hall in the town of Hamilton was defaced. Anti-India and pro-Khalistan graffiti was spray-painted near its base. In July last year, a statue of Mahatma Gandhi, located at the Vishnu Temple in Richmond Hill, was defaced. The 20-foot-tall bronze statue was situated in the temple's Peace Park. These incidents have continued with a marked rise in their frequency, raising a series of questions that Canada must answer.
Let's now shift focus to China. What's happening there? The Chinese president is waging a war on China's financial industry, cracking down on one Chinese bank after another. Why is that? China's banks and insurers have become the latest target of Xi Jinping's sweeping anti-corruption crackdown. Throughout the last 3 months, in fact, China's top anti-graft agency, the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection, has investigated over a dozen senior executives, officials running the most important financial institutions in the country. And the names of 3 of them stand out. Li Xiaopeng, the former chairman of China's Everbright Group, one of the country's oldest and largest state-owned financial conglomerates. Liu Liange, the former chairman of the state-owned Bank of China, the country's 4th largest lender, and Wang Bin, the former head of the state-owned China Life Insurance. Let's start with Li Xiaopeng. On Wednesday, he was put under investigation. Why is that? For quote-unquote disciplinary violations. What sort of violations? The Commission did not disclose any further details, but the fact that it is involved suggests that the accusations against Li are serious. You see, 6 days back, something similar happened with Liu Liange, the former chief of the Bank of China. In February, the 62-year-old was abruptly removed from his post as chairman and party chief at the leading state-owned lender. In March, he was put under investigation by China's top anti-corruption body. What for? Well, the 62-year-old is suspected of serious violations of discipline and law, the usual euphemism for corruption in China. And he is apparently undergoing disciplinary review and supervisory investigation. This, by the way, is according to a joint statement by the National Supervision Commission and the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection. Next, we have Wang Bin, the former chairman of China Life Insurance. In January this year, he was officially charged with taking bribes and concealing overseas deposits. He was accused of taking advantage of the various positions he has held as vice president of the Jiangxi branch of the Agricultural Development Bank of China, as president and vice president of the Beijing branch of the Bank of Communications, and as the chairman of China Life Insurance. The 64-year-old is also accused of concealing large deposits he made into overseas bank accounts. So in 4 months, 3 top executives have been sacked and subjected to a corruption probe. What does that tell you? How should we view this? And what really is China up to? What's going on? We don't know, but reports saying that in the days ahead, this crackdown could intensify. Have a look at this report now. Last week, the CCDI announced that it would be inspecting more than 30 major state-owned firms, 30 of them. They include financial giants such as China Investment Corp, the nation's sovereign wealth fund, China Development Bank, which provides financing for key government projects, and Agricultural Bank of China, another large state-controlled lender. Now remember, this crackdown comes just days after Xi Jinping secured a historic 3rd term. Immediately after this, he stacked his top team with Communist Party loyalists, and then he moved on to consolidate the party's hold over the economy. Now that said, this crackdown raises some serious questions. Questions on the integrity of Chinese banks. How corrupt are they really? Well, financial observers saying that they are as corrupt as it gets. You heard that right. You see, most of the banks in China are state-owned, which means most of the decisions are not taken by financial experts, but politicians. And as a result, they end up lending money to financial institutions or companies that have close ties with the government officials. And this does not necessarily mean that these companies are equipped enough to repay the money that they take. This leads to less scrutiny, less accountability, and more corruption. What does that tell you? That Beijing may snare some bad apples in its latest rectification campaign. But you see, the rot at the core of the financial sector still needs a stronger medicine. And as Xi Jinping cracks down on Chinese banks, thousands of miles away, one question is buzzing across Europe. Has Xi Jinping launched the golden age of Chinese diplomacy? Is he now the diplomatic emperor of 3/4 of this world? I am not asking these questions to boost Xi Jinping's ego. I ask them because of 2 recent developments that indicate how China, till recently considered an outlier, has suddenly started to expand its influence with startling momentum. Take the 2 theaters of conflict, one in West Asia, where 2 perennial foes, Iran and Saudi Arabia, have agreed to a breakthrough understanding in a deal brokered by Beijing. And the second, of course, is Europe, where the war in Ukraine has created nuclear fissures. China's peace plan on the Ukraine war is becoming a platform for discussion. And if you need more proof, then just have a look at who all are in Beijing right now. The foreign minister of Iran, Hossein Amir Abdullahian, the Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia, Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, and the President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron. As I speak, all three of them are meeting CCP officials in Beijing, trying to douse the flames of their respective geopolitical flashpoints. Let me start with West Asia. This afternoon, the foreign ministers of Riyadh and Tehran met in Beijing. And what was this meeting all about? Well, the decision to restore bilateral ties and reopen their respective embassies. And guess who presided over this meeting? The Chinese foreign minister himself. And this was not a closed-door meeting, by the way. It was a meeting filled with optics. Just have a look at these visuals. They show the three leaders awkwardly posing for the cameras. And soon the Chinese foreign minister nudges them for a three-way handshake. The leaders comply and break into smiles. You have to watch this.
Thank you.
China must be feeling really proud of itself for having pulled this off. After all, it's not every day that you see the Saudis and the Iranians having a laugh together. And the fact that this happened on Chinese soil raises the country's profile as a global diplomatic power, one that could match or even upstage the United States of America. For the Saudis have clearly moved away from America's zone of influence. And here's another reason why I say this. The presence of Emmanuel Macron in Beijing on the same day when the Chinese foreign minister sat down with the leaders from West Asia. The Chinese president was holding talks with his French counterpart. Have a look at these visuals now. They are from a bilateral meeting between officials from both countries. And if you go by what they said, it will seem as if they are not on two opposing sides of the war, but allies. Listen to this.
The world today is undergoing profound historical changes. As permanent members of the United Nations Security Council and major countries with a tradition of independence, China and France, as promoters of the multipolarization of the world and the democratization of international relations, have the ability and responsibility to transcend differences and restraints.
The Russian aggression in Ukraine has dealt a blow to this stability. It ended decades of peace in Europe. I know I can count on you. Moreover, under the two principles I have just mentioned, to bring Russia to its senses and everyone to the negotiating table.
Did you hear what Macron told Xi Jinping? I know I can count on you to bring Russia to the negotiating table. And what Macron said next must have surprised European policymakers all the more. At a joint press conference shortly after the bilateral, he congratulated China for brokering peace in West Asia, a much-needed validation for Xi Jinping and an indication that he expects Europe to trust Xi Jinping to bring peace in Ukraine as well. Listen to this now.
Let's start talking about peace and stability. We will have the opportunity to come back on many subjects in our discussions tonight and tomorrow. In regards to the situation in the Middle East, the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, I congratulate you on this very important progress.
And how do we view such statements? Is Macron pushing European leaders to engage with Xi Jinping? Does he want them to consider China's 12-point peace plan? Well, it certainly seems like it. For guess who is in Macron's entourage on this visit? The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. And here's what the leader said a day before meeting Xi Jinping. He warned Europe about the risks of cutting off China. He said Europe must resist reducing trade and diplomatic ties with Beijing. Let me quote the exact statement. There is that impression that decoupling from the Chinese economy is already underway and that the only remaining question is over pace and intensity. I do not believe, in any case, I do not want to believe in this scenario. And how should we view this? Is China's diplomatic blitz succeeding after all? Is China's charm offensive slowly bearing results? Again, it certainly seems like it. In West Asia, you have Saudi Arabia and Iran. They have put their trust in China to broker peace. In Europe, the second largest economy, France, has put its trust in Beijing once again to end the Ukraine war. And even Ukraine, by the way, the country bearing the brunt of the Russian aggression, is backing China's peace plan. The Ukrainian president himself is asking Xi Jinping to visit Kiev. What is this, if not a vindication of the Chinese president's efforts to cast himself as a global peacemaker? He is leveraging his country's economic clout in third-party negotiations, leveraging his influence to stabilize volatile parts of the world. Yes, he might have ulterior motives. Yes, these mediations could secure important diplomatic, geopolitical, and economic benefits for Chinese interests. But it seems more and more countries have calculated that the value of Chinese diplomatic brokerage is worth the price that China can extract. That it is worth the price of even causing American displeasure. The return of China to global diplomacy does worry one country more than any other, and that, of course, is the United States of America. For China is occupying the space which Washington has commanded since the 1950s, and indeed which America expanded in the 1990s after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And China has not hidden its ambition to replace America as the world's foremost and most effective diplomatic powerhouse. Moving on for now, a Saudi prince who owes Credit Suisse millions of dollars will have to cough up for his luxurious lifestyle. Investors of the now fallen Swiss lender have been losing money for the last few months. But if there is a reason to cheer, it is the fact that a London court has ruled in its favor now. Here's more on that.
This 82-meter super yacht has a gym, a movie theatre and 5 decks to entertain its owner and his super wealthy guests. And its asking price is over $65 million as of October 2022. With a price tag that big, you're probably wondering how many people can afford to pay for it. Seems like none. The Sarafsa is owned by Saudi Prince Fahad bin Sultan bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud. And now this yacht is at the center of a storm. A financial uproar that includes the Saudi prince and embattled lender Credit Suisse. Credit Suisse recently won a $41 million lawsuit against the Saudi prince. This after Credit Suisse issued a notice to the prince to pay all its debt in September of 2021. Reports suggest that the prince had paid just 13,500 euros in interest for the super yacht. However, the prince had reportedly denied terms of the loan had been breached when the Swiss bank went to court for a settlement. Now the London court that was hearing the case has said there was no viable defense against the bank's lawsuit, which means that Credit Suisse will receive around $41 million from the Saudi prince. His family's wealth has surged more than any business person or royal family thanks to high crude oil prices. The questions that emerge from the Credit Suisse and the Saudi prince fiasco are this. Was Credit Suisse forced to lend to the prince because of Saudi investments in the Swiss bank? Are there more borrowers riding on Saudi investors? Credit Suisse's latest troubles began when its biggest backer, the Saudi National Bank, refused to infuse further capital. For now, the Saudi prince is asked to repay the loans taken for a luxurious lifestyle. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
On Wednesday, we told you about the rising tensions between Israel and Palestine. How this region is one flare-up away from a war. 24 hours on, the tensions persist. Let's first take a look at the latest images from northern Israel. Have a look at how rockets fired from Lebanon left a trail of smoke in Israeli skies. Israeli military saying at least one rocket was intercepted by the Iron Dome air defense system. This after Lebanon's Iran-backed Hezbollah vowed to back Palestinians after the clashes at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And have a look at these visuals now. Al-Aqsa Mosque being turned into a battle zone. Israeli forces stormed the compound for the second time in a row last night, firing stun grenades, tear gas, and rubber-coated steel bullets on Palestinian worshippers as the troops forcibly emptied the mosque. Angry Palestinians reportedly hurled stones and firecrackers in retaliation. Israeli police say they used force to evacuate worshippers who were holed up at the mosque with fireworks, rocks, and sticks. They said they were compelled to restore law and order after dozens of Palestinian juveniles targeted the officers. This latest round of violence coming hours after Israeli forces stormed the mosque, arresting and removing more than 400 Palestinian worshippers from the holy site, triggering widespread condemnation. But let's talk about what happened in May 2021. An Israeli raid triggered an 11-day full-scale conflict between Israel and Hamas. 256 Palestinians lost their lives in the conflict, while over 1,900 were injured. And there are fears that the latest raids will fuel another war. Let's now take a closer look at the border. Following the raids at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, Hamas fired a barrage of rockets over the last 24 hours, setting off air raids in southern Israel. The Israeli military, in fact, saying that they intercepted a total of 5 rockets. Releasing a video, they showed how they struck Hamas military posts, weapon storage and manufacturing sites. In the midst of escalating tensions, how is the Israeli government responding to this? It's already facing protests over judicial reforms. And Netanyahu has an uphill task to restore peace during the Holy Week. The clashes come as Muslims observe Ramzan and Jews observe the Passover. According to reports, the Prime Minister is set to convene a high-level ministerial meeting. The Security Cabinet meet is being convened after nearly 2 months. But why has the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound become a flashpoint? Why is it so important? Al-Aqsa Mosque compound is Islam's third most holy site. It is situated in the old part of Jerusalem. It houses the Al-Qibli Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, where Muslims believe Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. And next to the Al-Aqsa Mosque lies the Jewish quarter, which is also celebrating the Passover. The stark reminder of the 2021 clashes during Ramzan and Passover coming to mind as Israeli forces use brutal force in the world's holiest of sites. The events unfolding in the last 24 hours have divided the opinion worldwide, while the US has called for restoring calm. And the United Nations also expressed shock.
Secretary General is shocked and appalled by the images he saw this morning of the violence and beating by Israeli security forces inside the Al-Qibli Mosque in Jerusalem. At a time of the calendar which is holy to Jews, Christians, and Muslims, this should be a time for peace and not violence. Places of worship should only be used for peaceful religious observances.
With pre-Ramzan talks in Jordan and Egypt for calm on both sides now all forgotten, the big question is, will West Asia see another war. And as tensions simmer, the world is watching the moves of the UAE. UAE, along with China, urging the UN Security Council to convene a meeting over the Israeli raids at Al-Aqsa. Earlier, the UAE and Israel signed a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, which has come into force on the 1st of April. Even as Netanyahu and UAE's president have committed to strengthen ties over a call yesterday, the underlying tensions still remain, and it remains to be seen if the partnership stands the test of time. Incidentally, this will be the fourth meeting of the UNSC on Israel-Palestine tensions since Netanyahu came to power 3 months ago. So we ask these questions. Will the Israeli raids at the Al-Aqsa Mosque trigger a 2021 repeat? Can it trigger a full-scale attack by the Israeli forces? And on to a war that Japan is waging. The enemy is tiny, but it is wreaking havoc in the country. And the country's prime minister has promised to fight back. Are you confused? Well, I am talking about the war against Poland that the country has declared. Pollen levels in Tokyo have risen to their highest in a decade, making hay fever a huge cause of concern. First things first, what is hay fever? Hay fever is an allergic reaction to pollen, typically when it comes into contact with your mouth, nose, eyes, your throat. Symptoms of hay fever including sneezing and coughing, a runny or blocked nose, itchy, red or watery eyes. And now in Japan, as soon as the cedar and cypress trees start shedding their pollen, around 40% of Japanese have to deal with hay fever symptoms. Symptoms like itchy, watery eyes, even sneezing. Around 40% of them. No wonder then that hay fever has been called a national disease. And the country's Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, has said that hay fever has become a quote-unquote social problem. And he has promised action, including working with the ministers to come up with a way to get results. In fact, even though the Wuhan virus guidelines were lifted in the country and people no longer have to wear face coverings to safeguard themselves against COVID-19, a lot of the people continue to wear masks when they are outdoors because of the latest outbreak of hay fever. In fact, the pollen season this year has also caused a spike in the demand for nasal sprays, even protective glasses. Recently, the country's Environment Ministry had some bad news to share. It said that Tokyo and 11 other prefectures would witness their highest cedar pollen counts for 10 years. In a 2020 study of Japanese hay fever sufferers, about 80% had said the symptoms made them less productive. And this, by the way, is not the only war that Japan is waging. It is also dealing with the worst ever bird flu outbreak. As a result, egg prices are skyrocketing. Poultry flocks, of course, are severely impacted. And now the country is running out of space to bury dead chickens. Why is that? Because more than 17 million birds have been killed across the country this season. More than 17 million of them. Chickens are culled to prevent the risk of bird flu crossing over to other animals and human beings. And it is extremely important to dispose of the carcasses properly, so that the spread of the virus can be prevented. Also, so that the water supplies do not get contaminated. Some regions, in fact, are addressing this issue by securing other plots of land or by incinerating the carcasses. But not all of them have enough capacity to incinerate so many carcasses. From the Jungle Book's ferocious Sher Khan to Winnie the Pooh's joyful tiger. You might have even seen tigers with different personalities in fiction. But what if I told you tigers have different personalities in real life as well? In fact, researchers have identified two personalities in Siberian tigers. The big cats sit on two scales dubbed majesty and steadiness. Our next report getting you the details.
How would you describe a tiger? Not based on its physical traits, but based on its personality, its disposition. Would you call it fierce, confident, agile? Majestic, perhaps, just like humans are described based on 5 dimensions of personality. Scientists have identified 2 such dimensions for tigers. These scales are majesty and steadiness. What do these terms mean? How do they describe a tiger's personality? Here's how. Majestic tigers are dignified, imposing, and agile. These tigers rank higher on group status. They are healthier. They predate more on live animals, eat more, and mate more. In simple terms, tigers with majestic personalities are the alphas. What about the other group then? The one described as steady. These tigers are loving, obedient, and quiet. They are gentler and more sincere. While majestic tigers are more dominating, steady tigers are more collaborative. You see, all tigers are not wild and ruthless predators as we assume them to be. Many of them are tame and gentle. How did we come to this conclusion? Chinese researchers observed the behavior of 248 Siberian tigers. Their feeders or veterinarians were given a tiger personality questionnaire. They were asked to describe the temperament of the big cats. They used words such as adaptive, obstinate, stupid, and frank. Based on their responses, the scientist came up with the 2 personality clusters we already described. But we do need to take one thing into account. All the tigers reviewed in the study were semi-captive. They have been raised and handled by humans. This makes one wonder, what would the results be for wild tigers, those who roam freely in jungles? Would these personality dimensions apply to them? Would any of them be described as gentle, sincere, or steady? Bureau Report, WION. The world is one.
And let's now tell you what else made news around the world. Time for Gravitas Global Headlines.
French demonstrators take to the streets for another day of protests and strikes to denounce President Emmanuel Macron's pension reform. A Swedish prosecutor leading a probe into the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipelines carrying gas from Russia to Germany says it is still unclear who was responsible. In a surprise move, India's central bank hits a pause on rate hikes, says won't hesitate to act if needed. The central bank has already raised rates by 2.5% since May last year. Moscow says it has foiled an attempt by saboteurs from Ukraine to enter Russia. Russia has frequently blamed Ukraine for what it calls terror attacks in border villages. European aircraft manufacturer Airbus will open a second assembly line in China. Airbus chief signs mega deal to supply planes to China. Protesters in Argentina take to the streets against soaring inflation and the IMF deal. Workers' groups block roads and highways in capital Buenos Aires. Government says poverty in the country has increased to nearly 40%. Several students from schools across the U.S. walked out of their classes to protest against gun violence. The walkouts were organized by the organization called Students Demand Action. With the walkouts, students are asking for meaningful strategies to keep schools safe. Ukrainian tank crews began practicing firing drills in southeastern Zaporizhia region. Ukrainian defense minister said last week that a spring counteroffensive could begin as soon as mid-April. Frank Lampard has been appointed Chelsea's interim manager. The club's all-time top scorer returns to Stamford Bridge just over 2 years after being sacked as manager. He will be in charge of the Blues till the end of the season, while the club search for a permanent replacement for Graham Potter. Reigning world champions Argentina have gone top of the FIFA rankings for the first time since 2016. Lionel Messi's side dethroned fierce rivals Brazil after 2 friendly victories in March. France have moved up to second, while Brazil have slipped to third.
On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.